May I please have your full and undivided attention? It is time for the Paranormal Rundown. Hello, this is Cedric Dankworth-Smythe. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all fans of the paranormal, the supernatural, the unusual, the entertaining, the terrifying, the horrifying, and those things that go bump in the night and in the daytime too. This is the one and only Paranormal Rundown, where the lads, the gang of nerds, choose from over 2,700 carefully curated paranormal topics. Our guest for this episode is Jim Harold, host of the longest-running paranormal podcast in existence. That's the Paranormal Podcast. Ain't that amazing? Plus, he also hosts Jim Harold's Campfire. You should listen to both. Cedric Dankworth-Smythe says so. Topics are all over the place this evening. This is not a dream. Pain in dreams. Loved one in dreams. Whitley Strieber. God's simulation, which might just be called us. Ghouls, Djinn, tulpas, terrestrial aliens, and much, much more, including retrocausality. Where else will you find a list of topics like that? So, pull up a chair, get some popcorn or your favorite comestible, and listen as the gang of nerds, Father Michael Birdsong, J.J. Johnson, Dave Griffith, and Vic Hermanson, learn the proper way to do a paranormal podcast. It's going to be an incredibly, amazingly, wonderfully, unbelievably fun time.
Hello, everybody. This is Vic Hermanson with the Paranormal Rundown. This is Season 2, Episode 1. We are definitely moving up in the world, and that there are 6 of us here tonight, and we have an extremely special guest. And Dave Griffith, our resident from Florida, is going to tell us about that guest.
Well, tonight we have Jim Harold, whom I've been listening to for a long time. On the Paranormal Podcast. He's the host of that one. That is the longest running podcast still out there, started in 2005. He also has Jim Harold's Campfire, which is a great show with lots of different stories on it. And that's 15 years, right, mm-hmm. Jim?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it just a ton of experience in what we talk about in terms of talking with people and stories. And we're super happy to have you here, Jim. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. And I'll just say one thing real quick. Now, the Paranormal Podcast is not the longest running podcast on the internet, but as far as I know, and nobody's been able to tell me differently, all my research, it's the longest running paranormal podcast on the internet. So as far as I know, if there's somebody out there that's been doing it longer consecutively, just let me know and I'll shut up about that. But as far as I can tell, I've checked all my compatriots that are still around from that era, and a lot of them, like I started 2 or 3 months before, but I'll take it.
So you're telling me there's podcasts other than paranormal podcasts?
Absolutely. Believe it or not. Believe it, you wouldn't know that. That and true crime.
Yeah, sorry about that. I knew I was going to stumble over that.
No, I just wanted to be clear. I wasn't claiming that I have the longest running podcast.
No, you're right. Longest running paranormal. I'll get it right next time we record.
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to give just a quick rundown for anybody who's not listened before of what the Paranormal Rundown is. Quite frankly, it is a product of obsession. About a year and a half ago, JJ asked me to help him get through a night when he didn't have a topic. I said, well, hey, I've been kind of thinking about this Paranormal Rundown thing where we've got a random list of topics and we let a computer choose them and we talk about those until we get tired of talking about that and we go to the next one. And
I like it.
He seemed to think that was a good idea. We pulled Dave in. At the time, I think we had 103 topics. So that number comes in my mind. because it could have been 108, somewhere around 100 topics. We had an absolute blast doing that. I mean, a genuine absolute blast. And then something clicked in my brain, and I just kept adding topics and topics and topics and topics. And now we're at about 2,560, which covers most things in the paranormal world. It's getting harder and harder and harder to add topics to it. So
it is a clear obsession of Vic's. He cannot stop. Every time he's like, okay, I think we'll probably stop at about 2,200. And then he goes on a run. So anyway, Jim, is there anything you'd like to talk about prior to us choosing some topics?
No, I just like to go with the flow, and it's like, they might pick something I don't know anything about, but that'll be okay. I'll just fake
Here's what makes it easy. We choose 6 topics, and you get to choose, since you're the guest, from those topics as to what you think would be most interesting to talk about.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
So and if all 6 topics just truly stink, which they usually don't, we almost always get something good, then we'll choose again. We'll cheat. So okay, I'm going to hit the F9 button and see what the topic generator brings up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's see. We've got Death of the Universe through Strangelet Proliferation. We've got the story of Esau. Was Esau Bigfoot? Did he have hypertrichosis? A movie quote. This is not a dream. This is really happening. But that was said by a woman, and she was very upset, and that was from Rosemary's Baby. Demonocracy, which is governance by demons. Fifth is Jabba Fofi, which is the African giant spider that lives in the same part of Africa as the Makolo Mabembe. And the 6th topic is, can spirits, whatever they are, grow, change, and learn?
I like the dream one, the dream quote, because it's a lot of what I've been thinking about lately in terms of the nature of reality.
Well, let's talk about that.
So we had, you guys might be familiar with the guy. He just recently passed away in the last month. I don't know if you know who he is. His name's Jim Willis, or was Jim Willis. He was actually a pastor, and he ended up stepping away from that in his retirement and started writing kind of more metaphysical books and those kind of things. And I think he was either in North Carolina or South Carolina. Very nice man, and I had interviewed him many times over the years. And the odd thing was I had interviewed him in May on near-death experiences. And then I posted the show in June, like maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. And that very week, he passed away, which was just kind of ironic. But I went to his website, and I was looking for an obituary or something. And he had a quote that really stuck with me. And I don't know if it was his quote. Maybe you guys will know it was somebody else's quote. But I thought it was very interesting, and it kind of maps to what I think about the last 19 years of doing these shows. It says, not only is the universe is not only more strange than we imagine, it is more strange than we can imagine. Mm-hmm. So the universe isn't just stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we're capable of imagining. And that sounded familiar, so I don't know if that's a famous quote from someone or if it's something that Jim came up with. And may he rest in peace. He was a great guy. And hopefully he has the answers to all those mysteries now. But nevertheless, you know, that's the one thing when people say, what have you learned in the last 19 years of doing this? And my thing is basically, I used to think, okay, ghosts are dead people. UFOs are necessarily aliens. Cryptids are animals that we haven't discovered yet. But it's become much more complex for me the more I get into it. And I feel that we only have a small peek into reality. It's kind of like if you walk up to an old manor and the door's open and you walk to a door and it's like behind the wall is one of those beautiful old libraries. And there's like a keyhole and you look in the keyhole and you could kind of make out that there's a library there, but you don't know how many books there are. You don't know what the topics are. You don't know what the titles are, let alone what's written in the pages. And that's kind of what I think sometimes we are. It goes back to Plato and the allegory of the cave. So that's what appealed to me about that quote about the dream, is that I don't know that we're even close to figuring all this out.
Is he the one that wrote the book, The Quantum Akashic Field? About it's a guide. It's a guide to out-of-body experience for the astral traveler.
I'll look up some of his books. He wrote, that was him.
That would be pretty cool with him talking about the dreams and stuff. I wish I knew more about this book. Oh yeah, he was a minister for over 40 years. He worked as a part-time carpenter, musician, radio host, etc.
Really nice guy. Really nice guy.
Pretty interesting.
He was, and I'm sorry you didn't get to meet him because he was really a very nice man, and he obviously thought about a lot of these topics. And that episode, and it's up on the Paranormal Podcast now. It's just kind of ironic. We were talking about that subject, and within a month or so, he was gone, and that goes to show you.
Wow,
never know. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the universe being stranger than we can imagine it is. That's either Einstein or Sagan. It's a kind of quote I probably should remember as to who actually.
Somebody. Yeah, I probably should ask Claude or somebody, some AI that will be able to track it down. But that sounds right.
We've had dreams have been top of the topics recently between a couple of different podcasts. JJ's had some pretty intense experiences with dreams, not good ones.
Unfortunately. We had an episode about dreams on Ending the Curse too. That was what, the first one we did, guys, or something?
I think it was.
Yeah,
I think it was. And it's amazing how much we don't know and how real some of these things seem to be. Not just your normal dreams, but some of these that stand out. Like, and JJ, talk about the one with pain. That was something different.
Oh, yeah.
Like, most people don't feel pain in their dreams, but he had dreams with that.
He did.
Wow.
Yeah, I've had 4 separate dreams in my life in which I have actually felt pain. I don't know if this is because of a familial curse or if it's just a quirk of biology, but I have nightmares. 90% of my dreams are nightmares. And that's a pretty common trait amongst other family members of mine. And I've died numerous times in my dreams. And the common parallel has always been, even in the midst of a dream, and I am not a lucid dreamer by any stretch of the word, I've never felt pain. In fact, my mind always noted, well, that should hurt. It didn't. And then I would wake up after expiring. Well, one time in Tokyo, and now 3 times during the last Lent season, I had dreams in which I felt physical pain. And each one of the dreams, that pain intensified.
Do you think it intensified because it was the Lenten season?
I honestly have no idea, and I wish I
would say yes.
Well, I had sought the opinion of the bishop who runs the Nicolaitans TV network, and it was of his opinion that these things happened because it was during Lent, and that was another one of these special times in which the spiritual world is closer to our world, whatever the case may be. And I'm not claiming any authority over any of that, but yeah, I would say, I mean, it's true from that aspect, but also if you just think about scientific paradigms and the way that physics has been operating, close to the end of the 19th century, people thought well, physics is essentially done. We've classified all the classical forces. We know everything that's going on. And then Einstein erupted onto the scene with a brand new paradigm of displacing classical Newtonian physics. And that then began to open an entire can of worms. And then now we're into the world of, spooky action in the distance, quantum physics, and the idea of virtual particles or virtual snow that happens in the vacuum of space, where things just constantly are created and destroyed, still creates no volume, but yet these things are still there. And we never would have imagined that would have been the case at all. And yet it is. And the more we dig into this, the more that we realize that we don't know. And Jim, you bringing up the allegory of the cave is kind of perfect here, because if all we're seeing is shadows, how could we ever comprehend the shape of an actual human in terms of the texture of the flesh and what composes them, etc.? It's fascinating, and I don't think you can ever take into question how much we truly do not know, especially as we view the world through a cage of language.
Hello, this is Avalon Leanne Dankworth Smythe. Did you know that Avalon is depicted in Arthurian literature as an island of magic, where Excalibur was forged, and where Arthur was taken to recover from his grievous wounds after the Battle of Camlan? Well, now you do. Along with my father, I am back for Season 2 of the Paranormal Rundown. Please excuse this interruption, but I would like to take just a moment to talk about the allegory of the cave. Plato, the Greek philosopher and student of Socrates, wrote a philosophical work called The Republic, in which he discusses the way that human societies should or might be structured. In Book 7 he relates the allegory of the cave. Imagine that in some portion of the world, there is a cave in which there are a number of prisoners. They are seated with their eyes toward the back wall of the cave. They are restrained in such a manner that they cannot rise or look around. All they can do is perpetually stare at the back wall of the cave. Behind them is a partial, vertical wall, behind which is a path, behind which is a raised platform, upon which has been built a large fire. Next to the fire is the pathway up to the surface world. Each day, people take various objects such as silhouettes of horses, apples, ships, and other varied physical things, and walk behind the prisoners with these objects elevated above the partial wall. The shadows of the objects can be seen by the prisoners, cast upon the rear of the cave, but the people carrying them cast no visible shadow as they are behind the partial wall. The prisoners have never experienced anything in their lives except these shadows, and unsurprisingly, come to think of these shadows as being the entirety of the actuality of the world. One day, one of the prisoners finds that his shackles are no longer functional, and escapes into the surface world. At first, the light of the sun, outside the cave, is blinding and painful. But over time he becomes accustomed to the light and learns with both pain and wonder that the world is comprised of a far more complex set of objects and circumstances than he had ever experienced, or even suspected while incarcerated in the cave. Upon having his awareness expanded, he decides he has a moral obligation to inform his fellow prisoners. He returns to the cave eager to tell them of the reality of the outside world. Instead of being welcomed and lauded for bringing them this wondrous knowledge, he is condemned, and shouted at loudly and angrily. One of the remaining prisoners even threatens to kill him. No matter how he tries, he is not able to convince the prisoners that their limited and flawed perception of reality is not the correct perception. Of course, the ideas presented in the allegory have been discussed, expanded, and debated by philosophers and podcast nerds for thousands of years.
The other thing about dreams is on the Campfire show, Jim Harold's Campfire, available wherever you get your podcasts. Anyway, we get a lot of dream stories, and dreams are kind of tough for me in this way. Let me explain what I mean. So you can think, to me, there's different kinds of dreams. There's the dream that is just kind of like brain junk. You know, you go to the grocery store and then that night you have a dream you're flying on a head of cabbage, right? I mean, the significance of that's probably, you know, just brain junk. But then you have people who have, and then this kind of one could go either way. You have people maybe who have issues, sleep apnea and different things, who report seeing beings in their room and that kind of thing. But then you have the people who just have these dreams out of the blue, maybe about a past loved one or something where they say it's more real than real. That's a very common kind of description. And they talk about some kind of visitation and interaction with a past loved one. I'd be curious to see what everybody thinks about those, because to me, it's kind of like, yeah, you've got the brain junk ones. You've got the ones where people have these very sinister dreams. Sometimes there might be a biological and medical cause for those. Maybe sometimes not. Maybe sometimes not. What do you think about these visitation dreams from past loved ones?
Well, I'm the opposite of JJ. Whereas JJ has 90% nightmares, my dreams are delightful. I enjoy every night that I sleep for the most part. It's not that there aren't ever any nightmares, but I've only, in my entire life, only had 2 dreams about the visitation of a loved one, of a dead loved one. One for my mother, one for my father. The one for my mother was a happy dream. I was on a huge, way larger than a human could actually navigate staircase. But there were other little staircases cut into it, and there were ladders and there were ropes. There was a way to get down the staircase slowly. Finally, I got to the bottom, and I'm walking along, and somehow I know where I'm supposed to go. I'm supposed to go to a nursing station. And so I'm a former nurse, and I walk down there, and I say, "Hi, I'm here to see Mary." I won't use the last name, but they said, "Oh, yeah, we've been waiting for you. She's back there. Just come on back. Go back to the first room on the left." Go in there. It's a huge darkened classroom, like a big college classroom. There's a professor up at the front of the classroom who's teaching, very quietly, very diligently, and everybody's paying attention. And my mom is in the last seat in the back on the left. And she's writing notes, reading. She looks up at me. She doesn't do anything except just look at me very peacefully for a minute and goes back to her notes. And the clear message is, "Okay, I've seen you. I'm fine. You can go now." You don't need to stay anymore. And it was a very peaceful dream. I left feeling like, oh, that'd be a great thing for mom to be doing. Learning the things she never got to learn in life. It'd be the sort of thing she'd do. I had a dream about my father, which was almost the exact opposite. I find myself in this room that is very dark, very blackened kind of room with an uncomfortable feeling. My father is sitting no more than 6 feet away from me. He is probably, about 60 in this dream, where, he had developed the beard and, the look of the man. And the entire dream is him just glaring at me. Like he's livid, like he's extremely disappointed, like I've done something horrible. And the feeling I had in my mind was, I just have to sit there and take this. I can't get up and leave. I'm stuck. My life now is having my father glare at me like he despises me. That dream was not happy. And I did not leave that dream feeling happy. And it was sort of the thing where my body just finally says, enough. I need to wake up. Can't do this anymore. And those are the only 2 dreams I've ever had about a loved one that's passed away.
specifically with your dad's dream, if you don't mind if I ask.
Ask anything you want.
I'm falling right into the interviewer thing.
That's okay.
Force of habit.
That's what we want.
But here's the question. Did you feel that was a visitation from your father, or at the risk of playing armchair psychologist, did you feel there was something in your life that maybe he would have been disappointed by or disagreed with, and it was manifesting itself in that way?
Both. You know, it felt like a visitation from my father. It felt like he was unhappy about some things that were going on in my life at the time, which he would have had a right to be unhappy about. I mean, I don't come on here claiming to be a perfect person.
There's well, you know the saying, there was one in you and we know what
what happened to him.
So I'm certainly not one.
It seemed to be an expression of disappointment over a long period of time, including now, which is actually, I don't think, the way that we parted. You know, as Dad was dying, he died suddenly. You know, he had expressed to me earlier that he deeply trusted me, and there didn't seem to be any kind of negative emotions between us.
Well, maybe this was just about one thing. It didn't have to be a generalization to your whole relationship.
Right. I don't know. And that's the difficult thing about a dream like that, is there's really no way of getting any more information.
Well, that's the thing I say, Campfire. One of the difficult things about Campfire stories, and I just came up with this, you know, and again, I'm a big believer of like God or the universe or whatever, like feeding you things. And this line came to me maybe a month or two ago. I think it's so true. With Campfire stories, many of them don't end with a period. They end with a question mark.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's a brilliant statement. Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, that's so, I'm like, I'm not smart enough to think that up. But I'm like, it's true. And when you get into these things, so many of these topics, and that's why you can go down these rabbit holes, because, you know, there is no answer. It's not the Brady Bunch and it's 22 minutes and, you know, everybody makes up and it's, you know, kumbaya. It's like there's a big question mark and like, what the heck did that mean?
Well, I was very impressed with your analogy of the library, where all you can see is through the keyhole. And, you know, if you're really good, if you have really good vision, you can kind of read some of the titles in the books. But that's been my experience after, you know, studying this material pretty deeply now for, I don't know, about 3 years or so. You begin to see or begin to feel or perceive what seem to be tendrils, connections between these things. But getting an idea of exactly what those tendrils and connections are, that's a lot beyond my pay grade.
I interviewed Whitley Strieber a couple of times, and
that must
one
have been
time,
fun.
Yeah, it was very interesting. He's an interesting guy, and something he said kind of like, whoa, took me back, because I'd never made the association. I'm not even saying now that I agree with the association, but when you talk about things connecting you that you might not put together, apparently his wife, Anne, who has passed, I believe, was going through some letters or something, and letters they were getting from people and different research materials she was looking over. And I guess she just kind of one day said, you know, this whole phenomena of these visitors, because I think he calls them the visitors or the others. He doesn't call them aliens. But this whole thing with the visitors has something to do with death. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if I agree with it. But that was one where, you know, when somebody kind of says something, especially somebody as well known as Strieber, and you kind of go, whoa, I've not heard that before. And that was one where, and another person who told me, I don't know, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Brad Steiger.
Oh,
he
yeah.
wrote probably, you know,
200 books.
I got to interview him quite a few times, and he was great. I really just enjoyed him very much, and I really miss him as a guest. And it's just somebody to get to talk to Brad Steiger. And he said that, he had done books on everything from ghosts to UFOs, cryptids. He had done it all because it was his job, right? He made this career of talking about all these topics we love in books and did it very well. And he said, when he first started looking at this stuff, it was very siloed for him. But over the years, and I've heard this from a lot of people, that there seemed to be some connection. You think about George Knapp and the Skinwalker Ranch. And this has nothing to do with the dream, but I'm kind of doing the jazz thing here.
This is what we do, by the way. So
yeah, this is fine.
But anyway, the point being that the Skinwalker, the hitchhiker effect, people who were working at the Skinwalker Ranch, their families way away from the actual ranch were having paranormal things happen in their house. That's why I always wonder, underlying this, is there some kind of trickster energy? Is there something maybe messing with us? And we talk about shapeshifters, but is it kind of like a shape-shifting phenomenon? And it does tend to I think it could make you go insane if you can't step away from it for a while, because there is so much and you go down the rabbit hole and it is another thing. So you got to be able to step away and cut your grass, go to a ball game, have dinner with your family. You got to be able to step away. I love it. I'm totally into it. I spend hours on it every single day, but sometimes you got to step back because there is so much to it. It'll suck you down like a vortex.
It can completely consume you. And as such, alter your perspective on things in a bad way, in not so good a way.
Well, I've noticed that after I've done some very heavy episodes, some very heavy research into these areas, I'll just feel it. It's an oppressive sort of feeling. I've got to step away and do something else.
Right.
I need a hike in the woods. I need 3 days of just reading Douglas Adams, yeah, or something along 42. Those. Yeah, 42, something along those lines. I've got to do something to get my mind out of that.
Well, and it's not just when you become preoccupied to it, and you need to take that kind of Isaac Asimov moment to step away, let your brain process it in the background while you do something mindless, and then come back to it. At least for me, and I think Father Birdsong would kind of echo into this as well, is when those other things begin to intrude upon your life, not of your violation, but of theirs. And I'll say it right now. That's why I wear 2 exercise medallions. I have couple of bottles of exercise holy water sitting around. I've got purified salt and purified oil sitting around. I mean, it's to the point where it has become an occupational hazard. And actually, I recently released an episode where I asked the question of, well, knowing what I know now, would I actually go back and change this trajectory of my life? Would I have never read Hostage to the Devil by Father Malachi Martin and never become obsessed with this particular line of questioning? And the answer is no. I'm glad that I did. It certainly has made me beef up my own kind of internal protections, but it's still not an easy road to hoe.
But it's interesting for me because I've always been a believer in afterlife, higher power. I look around. I don't think all this happened by accident. And if anything, this has all strengthened my belief in that, and my belief in an afterlife and so forth, which is probably counterintuitive. And some people would think you would become more cynical in things. I think it's made me more convinced all of that is real.
Empowering. Yeah.
I'm with you on that one. There's a lot of people that will say if you go the academic route and you start studying so much of the nuance and the fact that there are so many contradictory statements within any given religious work, or that, there are verses which are in this version and not in this version, or vice versa, that it will cause you to lose your faith. And like you, I have found it to be the exact opposite, that I have actually been completely reaffirmed by these things.
I agree.
I think it's interesting.
I agree.
I keep looking for someone who's a complete materialist, atheist, reductionist kind of person to come on the rundown.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I've talked to Dr. Michael Shermer before.
Yes, he'd be great.
He was, it's really interesting. In fact, I don't know if Joshua can look this up. There is a article that Michael Shermer did for Scientific American, and it's something like Anomalous Events Can Shake One's Skepticism, I think is the name of it. I could probably find it here in a minute.
I remember the article you're talking about.
I'm sure Josh is looking it up now.
Yeah, it's Scientific American.
I am.
But, and basically he tells what sounds very much like what we would call a paranormal story. And then basically his conclusion, I haven't read it for a while, so forgive me if I get it wrong, but the gist of it was like, well, this seems very, very possibly something that is paranormal, but of course it's not. And we know skepticism is real. And yeah,
I've got to admit, I don't understand that immediate jump.
It was, I'll just, let me see.
There's an article.
There, if you turn your chat on, you can see it from Josh.
Yeah, he's got the article link.
Yeah, and this is like his closing paragraph or something. He said, and then this is talking about his wife, because it happened with his wife. Mm-hmm. Jennifer is as skeptical as I am when it comes to paranormal and supernatural phenomena, yet the eerie conjunction of these deeply evocative events give her the distinct feeling that her grandfather was there and the music was his gift of approval. I have to admit, it rocked me back on my heels and shook my skepticism to its core as well. I savored the experience more than the explanation. The emotional interpretations of such anomalous events grant them significance regardless of their causal account, and if we take seriously the scientific credo to keep an open mind and remain agnostic when the evidence is indecisive or the riddle unsolved, we should not shut the doors of perception when they be open to us to marvel in the mysterious. So he actually, maybe I wasn't fair. He kind of left the door open a crack.
Looks like he did, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like he did very much, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really kind of heartwarming story. It's about his wife, a radio, and her grandfather was kind of like a father figure to her. He had passed. They were having a wedding. She wished he was here. He had this radio. This radio had been broken for years, mysteriously started playing that very day. They danced to the music. Then the next day, the radio didn't work anymore, and she took it as a visitation or an approval from the grandfather.
Did the radio play something that was beloved to the grandfather?
I don't remember that part. I don't know if that's in the article or not, but it was music that they were dancing by, because I guess this was the next day or the evening they got married or something like that. I got the sense this was like a wedding later in life. But I will say when I had him on the show, he was great in the sense that he was willing to have the discussion.
Yes.
He very much had his opinion. And I said, well, Dr. Shermer, let's say we agree on over 90% of the cases. What about that few percent? And he's like, oh, we know what that is. That's for graduate students. And it's like, we put that up on a shelf. And I'm like, take that off the shelf, examine it, try to figure it out.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah, that's the...
Well, that's what appealed to me about paranormal investigating. The idea... The first EVP that I got, the first good, where you're like, that wasn't there. I didn't hear that in the room. And it's clear as day, on the recording. The excitement of knowing there's something beyond what we can see and feel. There's something unexplainable that's happening. And that's what hooks you in. That's what people get drawn into this stuff. I mean, we got really drawn into it. My wife and I, for, a couple of years, joined a group. We were leading investigations with or parts of the investigations with a group. And I mean, we did like 36 investigations in a year and a half. And it's like a drug, right? Every time you get something that shows there's more than what you see, you get that much more excited and that much more into it. And it's like he mentions here, it's the experience at the end. He's talking about the experience being more, he relishing that more than that, feeling more than anything else. And that's what people are out there doing when they go on the ghost hunts or the cryptid hunts or whatever. They're feeling that excitement of maybe there's something more.
I just think if I would go on paranormal investigations, I turned out, and I'm dating myself here, but I turn up looking like Don Knotts and the Ghost in Mr. Chicken. So
great movie, by the way. I love that movie. I'm sorry, but I love that movie.
Can you do that little hyper fast shaking that he did? Yeah.
No. Maybe a little sniff.
So I'd like to tell one dream, since that's where we started. Maybe then we can roll the dice again, if that's okay with people. Sure. I used to do simulation modeling, real advanced math stuff that sometimes I would just get stuck and I would have no idea about how to solve a particular problem because nobody had done that particular thing before. And so I was banging my head against the wall on one of these problems. And I had this very vivid dream. I was in a doctor's office and in walks central casting reassuring doctor. You know, he's 52, he's 6'1", he's got the little salt and pepper hair, and his hands are perfectly clean, and he smells great, and he's got the huge stethoscope. Just sets you at ease. So he sits down and he says, well, listen, I've got good news and I've got bad news. Let's do the bad news first. The bad news is you have stage 3 glioblastoma. You probably have about a month to live.
Oh, God.
But the good news is I solved your modeling problem. And so then he walks over to this whiteboard and he starts writing out all this code. And I'm watching real carefully. And the next day I try this code and it works.
So best dream ever.
Oh, wow. Well, luckily the other part did not come true.
So I go to my doctor and I say, hey, listen, you don't think I have glioblastoma, do you? No, why? And I told him, he said, well, we can go do a CAT scan and an MRI, but I think the chances of you having GBM is just about zilch. So why don't we wait till you have some symptoms?
Oh, my God. I do have to interject one thing before the spin, because you mentioned something very interesting to me, and I'm interested in your perspective and the father's perspective on this. You mentioned simulation.
Yes,
and when we talk about the nature of reality, a lot of times the topic of simulation theory comes up.
It does.
Now, I have a thought on simulation theory, and I'm sure it's not original. Okay, so the idea of a computer program or an app is that you have a programmer. I guess you could call them a creator, right?
You could.
Who creates a world and creates beings, in that world. Some of them are playable, some of them not, but they create a world. I think of like Sid Meier in the Civilization games, for example. So Sid Meier, I'm sure he has they probably just use his name at this point, but when he started, he probably, programmed out these elaborate worlds and things. I got to thinking about, because I do believe that we were created. It's like, well, wait, what is a creator? But kind of another name for a creator would be a programmer.
Developer.
So are we talking about the same thing? We're just using different language. Maybe we are, because I saw something that was with, I can't remember, Neil deGrasse Tyson and somebody talking about if they look at the universe at very fundamental levels, they're finding math equations. And I believe it was one of these like YouTube shorts or something. So
sure.
But the point being is that really when we talk about a divine creator, like we've thought, in religion for many, many years in the Judeo-Christian tradition and so forth, and we think about simulation theory, are we kind of talking about the same thing? We just have a different way of getting at it. What are both of your thoughts?
Well, let me interrupt. I'd like to do a poll. We have 6 people here. Just, are we living in a simulation or not? I vote no.
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 Maybe.
No.
Maybe.
Leave it to David.
No, I'm entertained. But I will say I like my theory better.
I do too.
I do too.
I have said the same thing, which is the simulation nothing more than God's creation?
Well,
But see, it's
that
the same type of activity.
True, but with you saying that, and strictly this is just my opinion, with you saying that, it even strengthens the no part because of what you said. God's plan. God's plan is not a simulation.
But I'm not saying what I'm not saying is that it is a simulation. I'm saying we're calling it a simulation.
Mm-hmm.
We're just using different words to describe it. Do you know what I'm saying? We call it a simulation. We're seeing this. It's like if I see this mouse and somebody calls it, well, it's a mouse, and somebody else calls it that red plastic thing.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it's still the same thing. We're just calling it something
The description,
different.
the function, the form is all still the same.
True.
It's just a different phrase used.
So it's not meant as like an insult. It's just saying no. Right. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Jim, I will go ahead and tell you, and I really think these guys will back it up. As a pastor and priest, I'm probably the coolest one you'll ever meet. That's just my opinion.
Without any question.
But my idea, and now I understand what you're talking about, but when I hear the word simulation, and yes, I'm a paranormal geek guy. These guys have wrote to me in, and I'm done now. But when I think of simulation, I think of the Borg. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You know, where they envelop themselves into you and try to make you a new creation and inject their program or their agenda into your very core being and makeup. And I got to be honest with you. If we look at some of the things today, a lot, here I go down rabbit's hole again. I mean, Alice's hole again. But we find ourselves being programmed by these different thoughts and agendas and becoming simulated just like the Borg, if that makes sense to you.
Actually, it really does. I mean, if I find myself, I have to be careful with what I expose myself to.
Right.
Okay. In terms of media, in terms of the topics that people are using, because they will burrow into your mind and they will change you. Even if it's only a short period of time, and you can step back and say, whoa, time to drop the negative videos about X.
Right.
That's true.
And just like Jim said earlier, he has to step away, and I find myself in that same situation all the time. Especially, I 90% of the time refuse to watch the news. Why?
Because you come away feeling unhappy.
It pisses me off.
Yeah,
that's why. And I don't like the way it makes me think. And so that simulation. Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
No, please do. Actually, I've had the same reaction to the news the last few years. So we're in the same, exactly. I used to be like, I was like in high school watching Meet the Press. I mean, I always was like a news junkie, always interested in current affairs. You know, I mentioned, offline to you guys, I don't talk about politics because I think these topics are for everybody, but I used to follow all that very closely. And the last several years, I just got away from it because and frankly, it was both sides. I would just get infuriated. So I just stopped watching it. So we have the same reaction, actually.
Well, let me take it back to simulation from a traditional, like we're creating a simulated universe from scratch.
Yeah.
Did you ever see, Jim, did you ever see the movie The 13th Floor?
No. Ooh.
Great movie.
I gotta see that.
That is a great movie.
I'll have to add that to my list. I haven't seen it.
I've not seen it either. What's the spiel?
So the premise is
it takes place in a hotel,
programmer, right?
Yeah.
He's a programmer, and he's programming simulations. And they've created simulations that are so real that when you step into them, you can't tell that you're not in a simulation.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we're getting close there now, right? We're not there yet, but
not there yet, but we're getting that close. Yes.
So he's like, all right, but he creates these characters. They've got their own personalities. They experience things. You know, they have a log of the history they do. Well, as the programmer, he can step into a character in the simulation. So they can watch it from outside, or they can step into it and become that person for a while. And for a while, when they're in as that person doesn't experience anything because all the output is going to the programmer.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that are in the simulation, they have blank spots in their memory when they start, when the programmer jumps in.
And I'm assuming the simulated people don't know they're simulated.
Correct. They have no clue, right? So they're just going along. And then this guy starts having blackouts and he can't figure out what's going on. And
this is a recursive simulation.
It's a recursive simulation. It turns out they created a simulation that became so complex, it started creating its own simulations. Mm. And now, you know, there's an ending. They're unique. The ending's fun, but the real trick in it that he would always tell people inside of his simulation, if he wanted to show them it was a simulation, was you had to pick a random direction and go until you couldn't stop, and you just keep going, and then eventually things would start falling apart. It would be code that was, because they're only creating things around you where they need to.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But if you picked a completely random thing and didn't follow your normal patterns, you would run out of world.
Right. That's interesting. Well, I mean, and I don't want to stop the next spin, but that line of thinking gets you into the whole AI thing, creating its own. And it's interesting how science fiction predicts something. Oh, and then 25, I just clicked the link that was put up there, and 1999. So that's 25 years ago, not that long ago. And now that's coming true because the idea of AI, the scary thing is it becomes like recursive, and it can build upon itself, and it can improve itself and teach itself, and it might outstrip our ability to control it, and probably likely will. So it's interesting. I'm always fascinated how science fiction eventually almost always seems to become at some point science fact.
Science fiction precedes what happens in the real world, at least by 25 years, sometimes a lot more.
Yeah. Well, Star Trek and the Communicator. Now, I'm sure a lot of the designs and so forth were inspired by the Communicator, but, you know, our flip phones look like Kirk's Communicator.
Absolutely.
Just a lot of the things that, you know, you never, and I think it was it Jerry Parnell? He was a
yeah. Larry
Niven. He wrote about a pocket communicator, didn't he? Like in the 60s or early 60s or something.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
And it's basically a smartphone because you can read on it, you can do video on it and stuff, and then it comes to fruition. Now, part of that is the people building the things read the science fiction are like, wouldn't it be neat for us to build one of those, that kind of thing. But it's also, I also wonder sometimes if there is another aspect to that, because I do believe in divine. It's like a songwriter who says, you know, they have their biggest hit of their career. It's like a legendary song. Mm-hmm. And they said, I don't know where it came from. I wrote it on the back of a paper bag in 5 minutes. I don't know where it came from.
That happens. Well, you hear about that very frequently.
So sometimes I wonder, when people write these things in science fiction, are they tapping into universal consciousness, God, whatever it might be? And they're actually accessing things that are going to happen in the future. The other thing that happened, we know there have been many cases pre-internet, because with the internet, kind of everybody knows what everybody's doing. But pre-internet, there were people working on the same exact inventions a world apart, mm-hmm. that knew nothing of the other one's work. Where they, I mean, obviously science leads in a certain direction. There's some of that, but at times were people tapping into like this universal field of knowledge and accessing these things, and being able to pull them down and say, oh, I had was it Farnsworth that was looking at a farmer's field and watched them plowed and got the idea for the scanning tube for television, I think. So, I mean, is it that people are tapping into this universal knowledge and creating things? Anyway, talk about
what is it used to say, Vic? The quote, when it's time to railroad, build railroads.
Yeah, when it's time to railroad, people will railroad.
You have railroads pop up around the world. It's a technology leap that everybody seems to make at the same time.
When it's time to start stacking rocks on top of each other, you get a lot of pyramids. When it's time to, humans are the same wherever they are, and they have the same stuff, and they have essentially the same minds, and they come up with the same ideas very often simultaneously.
We are getting very close to break time, but I want to ask one question just off the wall.
Okay.
Just because I'm curious. As far as the simulations and AI goes as a general topic.
Yes, sir.
Talking about AI. I'll ask Jim. He's the guest. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Both.
Because
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'll use something like Claude all the time, but I'm not going to feed it all my personal data, but I'll ask it general questions. I mean, there was something where I had a very specific task I needed, and I needed a piece of software, and I didn't even know where to begin to look. And Google results, for example, now are so poisoned and such garbage. And I just said, here's my problem. Here's the problem I need to solve. Give me 5 solutions. And within 30 seconds, I had 5 solutions. And then I did my own research. I mean, the thing I think about the current state of AI, at least, is don't trust it 100%.
Yeah. Well,
use it as a jumping off point. Yeah. I think it's great for that. But I think like anything else, it can be used nefariously. I think there's going to be a problem controlling it. Although I think as a content creator or whatever job you're in, you better learn how to work with it because it's coming whether you want it to or not. My wife's like, I don't like it. I won't use it. And it's like, well, you won't use it, but the world's going to keep going and leave you behind. So you might as well become friends with it and try to figure it. And I look at it as a helper. I mean, one of my sponsors is Grammarly, and I've actually paid for them for years. And that's a form of machine learning. So I think it can be very useful as a helper. I don't want it doing my work for me. I don't want it writing for me. I want it maybe to help me write better or catch my grammar or suggest tone and things. But again, the idea is to help, to assist, not to do. And always, it's that old line, trust but verify.
Exactly.
Always double check the results. Don't trust it. That's where I fall down. But I am very worried at long term about the ability of mankind to control it.
I think that's the point that I was going to bring up, but in a different aspect, so to speak. Someone asked me what I thought about it just a few days ago, and I said, well, it's got its good points and its bad points. I said, but we need to pay attention to the bad points. It's a great tool, just like Jim said. However, I'm afraid some of our populations, so to speak, is going to lean on this and stop gaining knowledge and wisdom within their own self.
Oh, I agree. I'm from there, and I think you guys are the same. It's like I can do math on a calculator, but I can also do it by hand.
Right.
I can still sign my signature. I think people of our age had kind of the unique advantage of living in both worlds. We lived in an analog world, and then we lived in a computer world. And I'm a big, I used to build my own computers. I'm a big tech head. I love tech. I mean, what we're doing right now couldn't be done for tech.
This is tech.
But kind of like AI, you've got to realize it's not the whole picture, and you've got to bring the humanity into it. And I agree. I think that people will try to totally lean on it 100%. I don't think that's particularly a good thing.
Well, they're doing it already. You got, students using AI to write their papers, solve their problems.
My brother just stepped down from actually dealing with students. He is a department head at a fairly big university. And he said that he finally had to start saying, look, nobody's writing papers at home. I'm giving you a blue book. You're going to write papers in class. Because he was getting somewhere around 50% of papers that were coming from AI engines. And
yeah,
so our logo is AI.
But it can be, but it didn't do the show. But that's a good point. It didn't do the show for you.
It didn't do the show for me, nor did it come up with the idea for what the picture is.
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's just like the latest book I wrote, guys, The Sting of Betrayal.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to be honest. I got online and I said, oh, Microsoft, let me use this. What is the form of AI? And it helped me pick out the book cover. You know, I thought it was pretty cool.
It's very cool.
But it's a tool. Yeah. It's a tool, though, and it needs to be treated as a tool.
You just made my wrist sore by saying Blue Book. I remember those days.
Well, they still have them.
That's the thing. In my day job, I am a programmer, and I have, in the 25 years that I've been in the field, I have had to completely reinvent my skill set more than 7 times.
Sure.
And even now, I work for one of the largest tech companies in the world. And even my job now, if you compare it to what it was 2 years ago, is radically different, because I am now a Gen AI systems developer. And when you say Claude, it does my heart good, because I get to see, some of my work being used by everybody out there. So it's fantastic.
Claude is cool.
Yes, it is.
I like Claude way better than OpenAI, by the way. ChatGPT.
The big concern I have concerning AI and this entire trajectory of the world is I wonder how many people will at some point decide that they would rather exist in the AI world than the real flesh and blood world. And you will get the AI equivalents of, well, it'll be an addiction, but it'll be like AI hikikomori, which are the Japanese people who go into a room and never come out.
You already have that. Not even mixing AI into the equation. You have entire segments of the Japanese male, and it doesn't have to be male anymore, population, which have insisted that 2D is vastly superior to anything 3D, and they stick with anime and manga to the exclusion of everything else. Now, it's a tiny little segment, but if you compare that to what it was 10 years ago, where that was a running joke, and now it's manifested into a 2% reality, there's a real concern there. And now that games are beginning to get much more advanced, and we're even having older games like Skyrim being able to tap into Gen AI for all of its random dialogues with NPCs, these things are only going to keep getting more and more powerful and immersive. So it's about as well.
Yeah, like there's people now that literally live in virtual reality. They may take off their headsets to go to the bathroom or something, but 90% of the time they live in virtual reality just because they don't want to live in reality.
And I think with things like, we're seeing just the beginning of the technology, the Apple Vision Pro, which right now is, pretty much too expensive for the average person. But, if you look at what a CD player cost in 1985,
right.
when they first, in the early days when they first came out, they were, thousands of dollars.
$1985. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point being that those prices are going to come down. The technology is going to get better, and these things are going to be accessible to everybody. But you think about it. To some extent, there's always been something, right? Some people are alcoholics and they have the disease of alcoholism, and they're they're intoxicated a great part of the time.
Check it out in a different way.
Or other people use drugs, right? Or just some people are shut-ins and they just, for whatever reason, sometimes there's mental health issues, of course, but sometimes people just refuse to go out of their homes. So, I think this is just the latest iteration of kind of crawling into whatever it is and excluding the external world.
Whereas we podcast.
Yes, we podcasters.
Wait, we're out and about
all the time.
Sit behind a microphone 6 hours a day.
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Yeah. Hitting F9 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's see. We've got extant mammoths, meaning living mammoths. We've got ghouls, which we've never talked about before. I kind of know what a ghoul is. I've never spent any time talking about ghouls. Hollow Earth, The Blob, The Giant Claw, The Tingler, and other really bad old monster movies. Lovelock Cave, and vampire photos of celebrities. Or we can spin again if you want to.
What was that, like second or third one in? One of them.
Ghouls
or Hollow Earth or
Hollow Earth. We could talk about Lord of the Rings.
There's one about bad old monster movies.
Well, ghoul. How would you define a ghoul?
That's a topic near and dear to my heart.
There you go. Let's go for it.
Let's go for the ghouls.
Let's go for the ghouls. I want to hear JJ's ghouls.
So ghouls, the original word ghoul comes from Arabic, right, and it describes a reanimated dead body. However, I think what has become the zeitgeist of modern imagination about the ghoul is what you find within the chronicles of Dungeons and Dragons nowadays, in which the ghoul is depicted as a very emaciated form with a huge mouth filled with teeth and a large canonical tongue that will hang out of its mouth. And
JJ, aren't they associated with, even in D&D, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't, my limited knowledge for D&D, but if I'm correct, aren't they associated with like death in cemeteries and graveyards and stuff like that?
Oh, they are undead creatures.
Okay.
So they're sort of like the first zombie.
They are, although ghouls are much more intelligent. And at least within D&D, they cause paralysis if you're ever hit by them. There are superior versions called gas. The thing that I love about D&D, beyond all belief, are their extremely rich history and lore of all the various undead monsters or creatures that emanates from the negative plane. It's just awesome. But ghouls especially are just phenomenal. But yeah, they are much more powerful, much more strong, and much more intelligent than your typical undead. Still dumb comparatively to say a lich, but anyway.
Well, I mean, here's a question for you. If you're talking about ghouls or zombies, which zombies, I know that in some cultures there can be chemicals and things that can basically zombify people, and that's been done before.
Yep, right.
Certainly for real. But do you think things like ghouls have a basis in reality?
Wonderful question.
Well, when you said zombie and chemicals, it took me back to one of our episodes, and I think JJ was the one that brought this up one time about I would just call them a living zombie because they're dead anyway. They lean toward the way, but what was it, JJ? The pre-mummification where they turn themselves into mummies before they even.
Oh, the monks, who zombify themselves before death because they are self-mummifying.
Correct. Yeah, they will eat a mixture of herbs and bark and other types of emulsifying objects in order to preserve their body. A lot of Japanese monks especially were famous for doing this. And although the practice has been outlawed, some of their corpses are still on display as holy objects, and they've been around for more than 120 years.
I saw one of these in Thailand. We were visiting a bunch of Buddhist temples, and they had a glass case out at the front steps of the temple, and he was sitting in, cross-legged in his robes with a pair of sunglasses on. and I found online when we did that episode that he was he had self-mummified.
Yeah, they're absolutely amazing. I mean, even talk about testaments to an iron will, because these people begin the process up to 5 years before they expire, and they go.
But they look almost like stone. Too. They look almost like stone before they die.
But going back to zombies, though, if you're talking about like Haitian voodoo, then you've got your two different classifications of priests. You've got your Hondurs and your Bokors. Hondurs are your good practitioners. Bokors are your bad practitioners.
Your evil practitioners.
Exactly. And they're the ones who have supposedly crafted a type of chemical that if you ingest it, then you essentially become a slave to someone else's will. Your free will is overridden, and you simply follow mindlessly orders that are given to you. And if we think about some of the horrors that come along with possession, and that is having your free will completely overridden, but it's not being done by some supernatural entity, supposedly, but rather by another human.
By tetrodotoxin and drugs that are eliminating your will, essentially.
What was that movie, The Serpent in the Rainbow?
Serpent in the Rainbow.
Oh, yeah.
That they did that. So this Britannica article that Josh linked up says that a ghoul was a diabolical class of Djinn. So that would give them some definitely more than just the wandering undead type of feel.
I have a story about Djinn that impacted me potentially personally.
Please.
Oh, go for it. JJ going too.
So I don't know.
Djinn stories we can get.
Are you guys? Well, are you guys familiar with Rosemary Ellen Guiley? She's the late author.
Yes, very much.
She's my favorite. She was on my shows. Literally, I counted it up 20 times.
Very good. Mm-hmm.
And one of the more memorable ones was an interview I did on April 2nd, 2013. And she had a new book out, and it was about the Djinn.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed her about that. Now, I had an uncle who had been in the hospital, and I think I posted it the same day. And I'd had an uncle who had been in the hospital who was like a second father to me. He had been relatively ill, had an amputation and things, but I mean, I had no idea that, anything was imminent or anything. I thought, he had a decent chance of survival, no reason to think anything drastic was going to happen. Later that evening, I get a phone call. He's died. So my family lives in West Virginia at the time because they started out there. They moved up to Ohio. My dad worked in the steel mill. I was born here. Born and raised here. Lived here my whole life. But anyway, I had to go down and help with everything and the arrangements and all that stuff. And again, this was uncle who was like a second dad to me. So it wasn't, there's uncles and then there's uncles. And this was definitely more like a dad than an uncle. So anyway, got over that. 2 weeks later, I get a call. My mom dies of cardiac arrest, totally unexpectedly. I threw that book out. Now again, and I had heard, I don't know if this is true, but I had heard that maybe Rosemary, who later, she passed a few years ago. Mm-hmm. She stepped away from that work. I don't know if that's true, if like she was disturbed by it or something, but I had heard that perhaps she stepped away from that work. But that was the one book I got from, because all of her books, I kept all of them. She would send me her books, and I have a whole shelf full of them.
That's terrifying.
And I just said, you know what? I don't want this around me. It might have been a coincidence, but it was one hell of a coincidence.
Not a coincidence you can
when
ignore.
she wrote that book, it's funny. It's a small world. I investigated with her. She was going around and showing the book, and she came, I guess, Leanne Ball, who ran Spirited History, the group that I was in, she knew her. And so she came and presented the book to us. And we did an investigation at the Poe Museum and all this in Richmond. But I'm really glad I didn't buy that book. That's, I was curious because I had never really heard much about Djinn at the time. But they are spooky.
It's one of those things that I don't, even though I will tell this story, I'm not real comfortable about it. And again, maybe it had nothing to do with it, but boy, it was. And in fact, I'm in the process of moving some of my podcasts over, and I'm going, way back and moving stuff. I ran across that interview, and I'm like, yeah, it was April 2nd, 2013.
Well, we got to be very careful. Coincidence? I don't think so. And the reason why I say that is we got to be very careful about what we pick up from other people. We got to be careful about what we read, because we never know what entity, so to speak, may be connected with that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Let's just say
I definitely think that's a possibility, because I threw the book away. If I didn't think that was a possibility, I wouldn't have done that.
That reminds me of the story that JJ told one time about the evil eye on the train. You got to be careful what you're doing out there.
Yeah, and Djinn, it's a absolutely fascinating topic. I've done shows around it, especially if you're dealing with more Turkish versions of Islam. And I am not an Islamic scholar by any stretch of the word, but it is such, the more magical traditions are just absolutely fascinating. But this idea that Djinn, which are not, they can belong to different tribes. They can be good, they can be protectors, or they can be abjectly evil. And they are the closest things that Christianity would have to the demonic. And sometimes they go well past that. But if you've ever seen the films like Dabe or Under the Shadows, if you're looking for a pretty decent Hollywood depiction of what these things can do and what they are, they're on point.
Let's take this in a short, quick direction and deal with the book aspect of that. We all have stacks of books about the demonic and paranormal and all this stuff. You don't usually think of that, just reading a book, as an entry point. And when I met Rosemary, she was super nice.
Oh, I think the world of Rosemary. And by the way, when she passed, I thought, for all these, I just want to interject this because I think probably she's my all-time favorite guest. So I don't want to in any way cast dispersions on her. In fact, I remember used to thinking, boy, she must really like me. She must think I'm really great because she's so nice to me and she's so willing to be on the show. Boy, I'm really great. And then I found out everybody had the same experience with her, and she was like that
right,
to
that's
everybody.
Who she is.
Now, I also understood that if you were writing a book with her or something, or she was your editor, she was a taskmaster and she wanted it done, the right way. But she was a great professional and a great person. So I just want to make it clear, this is not anti-Rosemary. This is more I don't want to mess around. That old song, "Don't Mess Around with Jim." Maybe it should be "Don't Mess Around with Jim."
Mess around with Jim.
I love it.
There's our title.
That's it. That's it. You got it. So, but that was my point. Is I can't imagine her doing anything to those books, like laying a curse on them or anything like that. She would never. Right?
No.
So the idea of just reading about it causing problems in your life, but JJ's point about hostage to the devil, when you read that book, there is an intensity you feel about the experiences laid out there that maybe that is an opening to having something, sort of attracted to you.
Well, a couple of things. One, I want to go back to the idea of ghouls for a second, if nobody minds. The idea just pops in my mind that there must have been times in the past, let's say plague times, mass graves. Somebody dies or they think they're dead. They take them and they throw them into the big pit and they throw lime over them. And 0.1% of everybody they put in that grave isn't really dead. And they get enough water, they get enough whatever, they go crazy, they dig themselves out of the grave. They're really no longer human. They're out there in the wilderness, in the woods, and they probably became monsters. They became things that would hunt you down and kill you and try to eat you. Seems to me, Jim had asked, is there a real world component to this? I think a lot of times things like that turn into these big major legends.
That makes sense.
Because believe me, if you're living in the village where there is a thing out there, and it just happens to be Harvey, who used to live down the street. But
I thought you were talking about a gigantic rabbit for a minute, getting back to the rabbit.
Yeah. It happens to be your ex-neighbor, but he is out there killing things until they kill him. I think a lot of stuff like that results in stories about ghouls and other kind of monsters.
Well, and it's not often as easy to tell when a person has died or, if they haven't.
The whole Saved by the Bell thing.
Exactly.
Which is
a little bell,
your safety
that
coffins.
Could be pulled from within the casket in case you ever did, get mistaken to be dead. But
that idea is terrifying to me.
That is extremely terrifying.
Just about,
and you've
very
heard
few worse ways to die.
I don't know that this is just apocryphal or this actually happened where somebody would be exhumed and they would open the casket and there would be, marks where they tried to claw their way out. I mean, that's terrifying to think if that really happened to people, and probably did.
I'm pretty sure it has actually happened. Not very often, probably, but it does. When about 5 years ago, when I first moved to York, I was looking for places to hike. And I was out at a place called Rocky Ridge. And it's a rocky ridge. You're up high and there's lots of rocks. And I was looking down, and coming from the parking lot, this is something that's talked about on another podcast a lot, were 3 bald men wearing very strange clothing, like Tweedledee type clothing. Red striped shirts, overalls. Walking as close to unison as humans can walk. There was something in my mind that just told me, you need to go the other way. It just didn't look right. It didn't feel right. And who is it? It's the Monsters Among Us guy, I believe, who calls that phenomenon the mirrored men. And most people, when they encounter them, they end up having lost memories, lost time, that kind of thing. But people apparently have become somewhat familiar with them, and they say, don't even think about them. Because just the mere act of thinking about them, having them in your mind, is something that's going to attract them.
I was about ready to write that down, and I scribbled it out.
What, just thinking about them is enough to attract them?
Right. That's why I'm saying maybe I won't bother.
Yeah. And that's a pretty frightening thing to me, because I can't really control what I think about. It's sort of whatever you do in the next 10 minutes, do not think about purple polar bears. Well, of course,
Right.
that's all you can think about right now. You don't have any choice.
Exactly right. What else are you going to think about? Don't think about this. Okay, right.
Right, don't think-
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean-
Dostoevsky's famous. Don't think about blue-eyed polar bears. Like, you gotta love it. But I mean, that is a very common trend that you find within most creepypasta. The entire idea of I'm going to say it again, and I'm sorry, y'all. The midnight ice cream trucks, where
Yep.
you can become aware of their existence and start thinking about it.
Wait.
Midnight,
I don't know about midnight ice cream trucks. What are midnight ice cream trucks?
oh, it's a creepypasta where a friend plays a short audio clip of a supposed ice cream truck that keeps coming by around midnight. And the guy hears it and just will not leave his head. And he starts turning on the radio, and he will start hearing small little snippets of that song playing everywhere, to the point where one night he actually sees an ice cream truck pull up in front of his place, and it will not leave. And it goes through this entire story where, you know, if you even think about them, then they will come for you. And most people simply don't, they're not around anymore.
Well, that leads me to, you think about them and they show up. Is that a form of a thought form or a tulpa, where you
Certainly
basically create them? And I do wonder about this. I interviewed David Weatherly years ago about tulpas, and it was fascinating. And he told this one story about somewhere in the Far East, somebody basically invented a person who started following them around just by thinking of it. And I do wonder sometimes, you know, with poltergeist or different things, might it not be that the whatever it is not real and it's not imagined, but it's actually physically created? Probably the best example of that is the Philip experiment up in Toronto in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You know, so that's another thing, is that those mirrored men, I shouldn't even say it, but are they created by us? And it doesn't mean that we're imagining it, but we literally are able to create a thought form.
Well, they were definitely not in my mind before I saw them.
Right.
But it was
maybe not in every case, but
right. But yes, I think we can create thought forms.
The challenge I see with the thought forms, the tulpas idea, is always it would just be a nightmare. There would be stuff everywhere. So
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Have to be so perfect. I mean, you have instances where you have people who have meditated for years, right? Deep, devout monks who have created thought forms. I think that's where the, sort of the idea came from originally, but they are focused for decades trying to create something for just I'm worried about this ice cream truck thing, and then it comes outside. I just don't see how that can happen so easily. And if it did, we'd have, unicorns and what was it we said with the wandering guys, narwhals coming down the street, just
narwhals on pogo sticks,
Yeah, there's so much that would be out there. So I don't know.
Well,
how that would work.
Have y'all read the fantasy authors, or actually fantasy science fiction author C.S. Friedman?
I have not.
Okay. She wrote a fantastic series of books, and I forget the exact title of them. But the whole premise was there is a planet in which whatever humans would start thinking about would actually manifest. And they said that within 10 years, they had 30 different Jesus Christ walking around because they just manifested. And my worry isn't so much around what an individual thinks, but rather what kind of cultural, conceptions can maybe bring into play across a wide swath of individuals. And I think that creepypasta is pretty much right up there. You have a lot of these acknowledged, completely fabricated stories like Black Eyed Children or Zozo, and you can demonstrably prove that no, these things are absolute bunk. And yet you still have thousands upon thousands of people making whatever kind of content it is, whether TikToks or YouTubes or whatever, or chasing the invisible internet points, who are insisting that no, they are absolutely real and these are the things that happened to me. And I don't know, but it is a rather frightening
Black-eyed kids. I mean, I spoke with, I think, the guy who had the original experience or claimed to have the original, Brian Bethel.
Was he in the cinema parking lot or something? Or?
Yeah, he used to be a journalist down in Texas. Mm-hmm. He worked for the newspaper there for many years. This was, I think, in the 90s. It was certainly before online bill pay. And he was going to mail a check, like put it in a mail slot or something for a bill. And it was by a theater. And I'm just remembering off the top of my head. But he said that these kids came up and wanted him to take them home so they could get money to go into the movie. Mm-hmm. And they were very insistent. But the thing was, the movie was, and it wasn't like one of these big multiplexes. They had like one screen, and the movie was half over. And then it turned out that they were these sinister looking kids with these solid black eyeballs. And in fact, ironically, he just sent me a message today and I was chatting with him and I believe it. I think he did encounter something. Now, does that mean every black-eyed kid story out there is true? I doubt that. But, and he came on the show and told the story, but I really do believe there's something to that, what that is. Now, going back to the Djinn, one thing, because I saw Rosemary also give a great talk on that. We went on a paranormal cruise where a few of us were speaking and things. And she spoke a little bit on the Djinn. And she talked about how the Djinn will impersonate other beings. So could black-eyed kids actually be Djinn in disguise?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Certainly, absolutely no way to refute that.
Right.
Or to affirm that.
Exactly. It's more of a thought experiment.
It's more of a thought experiment. Well, I am aware of one situation where, two smart-ass teenage boys decided they'd buy some very, very dark whole sclera contact lenses and that they would use those and then walk up behind people and say, "Excuse me, can you please give me a ride?" Or "My mom's trying to call me," or something like that. And one of them found himself, at the other end of a 45.
Oh, boy.
And he's, "Whoa, mister, it's a joke. It's a joke." So
you guys are going to think that I have completely lost my mind if you hadn't thought it already.
Oh, don't worry. We did. I'm joking.
It's not been a particular mystery, really.
Exactly right. But when you guys were talking about the tulpa and all that, and specifically about the part to where, what you're thinking actually comes to pass through these creatures, so to speak. The only thing that I could think about at that moment was Nightmare on Elm Street.
But wasn't that based?
Freddy Krueger, yeah.
Wasn't that based on something real in Asia, or there was some kernel of truth?
Yes, there was.
I think it was based on an actual serial killer.
I don't know. The genesis of that is I thought that there were, and I don't know if it was Japan or Korea, there were young Asian men dying unexpectedly.
Through dreams or something like that. I can't remember. Yeah.
There was based, obviously it was taken out 72, levels out, but I mean that there was some kind of genesis of it. I can't remember what it was.
Josh, look that up.
I know.
There's never been a silence. We've never had a silence this long.
We've never had a silence. I know, right?
Well, but going back to Japan for a second, you have all of these wonderful yokai and yurei that are still being actively created. You hear about all of the classic ones, like a Kamikasa Obake, the giant umbrella with a giant tongue and the one leg, and or anything that comes from like Tsukuyomi, or the objects in which see so much use, they suddenly gain life. But when I was there, a year and a half ago, my family's from Japan, and we were just sitting around watching TV, and there came on one of the famous paranormal shows, in which was talking about the hyaku, which is a creature that can extend its waist up to the second or third story of a building. And it would scare people working at their office by looking in at them that's the sound of them jumping up and down, or the motorcycle riding, samurai armor wielding katana thing that would ride around in metro centers and scare people to death. I'm just like, oh, that's a new one on me.
Well, I'm sure that somebody decided they needed a motorcycle and a samurai outfit and a katana.
Oh, I'm positive of that.
Who was real?
That was in Black Rain with Michael Douglas.
Yes. Jim, we've got 15 minutes left. I
Yes.
would like to ask you, of all the things you've encountered lately or a long time ago, what have you found most compelling, most interesting? What's made you think about it while you're taking a shower? That kind of thing.
Well, two things. Mm-hmm. One is recently there were some Harvard researchers, I guess, that came out and said, in terms of UFOs and UAPs, maybe we've been looking up there. We should be looking down here. The idea of crypto-terrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, and I know that goes back to people like Mac Tonnies who wrote about that and so forth. Mm-hmm. But the idea, and again, going back to originally when I said, hey, when I first got in this, I thought UFOs were aliens, and and certainly I think some UFO, UAP stuff is military. Some of it's people who are just mistaken. Unfortunately, there's some hoaxers, but I do believe there's something to certain percentage of the phenomena. And, I've always been, the ET hypothesis. But the more I'm thinking about it, if you look at transmedium craft that can go from the sky to the ocean and back again, and those kind of things. And again, being a believer that we can't see everything that is here with us, kind of like we can't see ultraviolet light, but it's still there. Maybe the beings, maybe the things piloting those craft are right here with us or beneath the ocean floor. And it's just something that's gotten me thinking a little bit lately. Have I locked too much into the ETH hypothesis? Also, kind of, all the stuff that came out last year with the government and talking about non-human intelligences. They never said they were from outer space. And then some people even think, could they be demons of some type? But I think that I've locked in too long on just the ET hypothesis and have been too narrow-minded. And I think I'm widening my thought process on that.
Have you?
There's a lot of unexplored stuff under the crust of the earth, right? I mean, there are massive caves. Mm-hmm. There's massive, deep trenches of water, and it does make you wonder how much of this is really below our feet.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, if somebody would have told me that 10 years ago, I think this guy's got something's wrong with this guy. But now I'm becoming that guy. I'm wondering. The other thing is I've really become fascinated with the concept of retrocausality. Have you guys ever gotten into retrocausality at all?
We've never talked about it on the rundown.
Okay.
I've read at the best level I can, in terms of not fully understanding the physics, about the concept of it.
Yeah, the concept being, as I understand it, I'm sure my understanding is way below yours.
Doubt it.
But the idea that something you can do today
mm-hmm.
can impact something that happened in your past. And that makes no sense on the face of it. But scientists say the time is not linear. I don't know. They talk about things like
that would be the opposite
time.
of the butterfly effect then.
Yeah, well, here's an example. I'll give you an example in my life, and it could have just been a coincidence. Mm-hmm. But for the first better part of 15 years of my career, or is that right? 15, well, actually longer than that, the better part of the first 18 years of my career. I worked in radio and I was an ad salesperson. I'd gone to school for broadcasting, but ended up in ad sales because I got any job I could get at a radio station and fell into it.
Right.
So anyway, but the funny thing was, the whole time I was there, I wanted to know how everybody in the station did their job. Now, most radio salespeople, they didn't care about any of that. They just wanted to sell as many ads as they could to make as much money as they could.
Right.
And I wanted to meet my goals and make money, but I was fascinated with every job, and even jobs you wouldn't think. I wanted to know how the traffic person trafficked the ads. I wanted to know how the business manager did the invoices. I wanted to know how the engineers did their job. I wanted to know how the production, I wanted to know every aspect of that business. Now, it wasn't like I was going to own a radio station or anything, because that's a very expensive proposition. And this was in the 90s and 2000s. So podcasting really didn't come in until 2005. So, and at the time, I told my bosses I was doing, they're like, go ahead, play with your little toy. And the funny thing now is all the radio companies are like going gaga over podcasting, which I told officials at CBS Radio, like circa 2009, 2010 on a conference call, New York guys, pay attention to this podcasting thing. It's going to be big. And they said, go sell another banner ad. Gotcha. But anyway, point being that I was really interested in every aspect of that job. And I wasn't going to own a radio station, but then podcasting came, and I podcasted for several years and went full time in 2012, and thankfully have been able to do it since then. But what I did prepared me for this job, but I didn't even know this job existed. So my question, and there's other simple things about, like, the way I reconnected with my wife after a few years was turning on a computer that I hadn't used for 6 months and logging onto a very early chat room. And there she was. And we reconnected and been married for 28 years. So that's another thing. But I often wonder, is Jim from 2024 somehow communicating back to Jim in 1995? Pay attention to what they're doing. Watch what they're doing. Because in my job, I do all those functions I just mentioned to you. Mm-hmm. In a slightly different way, but the principles are the same. Traffic and commercials are the same thing. Production management is the same thing. Slightly updated with the technology, but it's the same job, just over a slightly different template, being podcasting, but it's the same principles. How did I know to look at all that stuff? How did I know to pay attention? Why did I even care? So maybe I was communicating, or that time that I turned on that computer I hadn't for 6 months and reconnected with my wife through happenstance. Was I saying, hey, Jim, turn on that computer. You're going to want to do that. That's going to be important in your life. So maybe sometimes that little voice is us from the future. It's
well,
kind of think about.
In my world, and I'm more so touched by the reconciliation of you and your wife. But hearing this story, and like I said, because of who I am,
right?
I would call that divine providence.
Well, that could be too. Yeah, I'm not discounting that either.
Well, let's take another theory. So our last, we did a little mini episode before this one, and in that conversation, we talked about tachyons and how tachyons, when the slowest they can move is the speed of light. And when they're going faster than the speed of light, they're actually going in reverse in time. Right. And so it's almost like light going backwards. Is that kind of how you viewed it, Vic?
Pretty much, yeah.
Right. So are you catching images from the future that are coming backwards? Is the body or the mind able to perceive somehow something from the future that is coming backwards with the tachyon as a carrier of that future image?
It seems, I love the idea. I find it deeply romantic. deeply fulfilling, deeply satisfying, but there are real world problems about it. You know, the idea of be sure to look at that computer. It's going to be important. That is a great message, but buy Amazon on day one.
Yeah, actually, I wish I had gotten that
one. Those messages, maybe they do come through to people, just not me.
Okay, but I'm not suggesting necessarily a specific message, because unless you have sat down and said to yourself in the past, you need to do this, right? I'm saying maybe you're actually perceiving the future coming backwards through time.
I have no problem with that. I through the 3 years that I've been doing this, I've kind of come to see the world as this massive fractal roiling cloud of energy and possibility, where for the most part, I don't really have any idea at all what's happening.
Same here.
Amen.
Same here.
Very true.
I don't have any idea at all what's happening.
Well, let me give you an.
Just one second. And just any time, any day, there could certainly be a message from future Victor or past Victor. None of that really would surprise me anymore. And JJ, I'm sorry. I just wanted to finish that sentence.
So I don't often tell this story, but it's one that upon hearing what Jim was saying about reconnecting with his wife, it immediately put this into mind. And I've always have thought about it as the past informing the future, but maybe I have it the opposite way around, where I was a young man and I had, it's probably about in the mid-20s, and I had a dream of, I was in a cabin and there was a raven-haired girl. And I was more in love with this thing in this woman than I have ever been in my entire life. And we had a phenomenal night together. And then I woke up and I longed for that. And it remained in my memory for decades until one night when I was in Tokyo, I met her. She was on we met in a restaurant, and the only thing that I remember is the way the light bounced off her hair. That was the only defining feature that I had in my mind, but I knew it was her. And that is my wife. And on Monday, we celebrate our 11-year wedding anniversary.
That's a fantastic story, JJ.
Congratulations.
Is it from the
you're
past?
right. You've told it as the past informing the future, but you're right. Maybe it is the opposite.
Maybe it is the opposite.
It could be.
Oh, great idea.
It's a strange world we live in.
Amen.
Yes, it is.
Jim, I understand you've recently released a new book. Why don't you tell the audience about that?
Yeah, well, probably the show I'm best known for is Jim Harold's Campfire. That's the show that people come on and share their real stories, and it's available on all the podcasters. I've been doing that particular show for 15 years. And we have a series of 6 books, and the 6th one just came out in May. And it is a compilation of 65 stories taken from the show. And it's kind of like it runs the gamut, just like this show does. There's good, bad, happy, sad. We've got reaffirming stories and heartwarming stories, and when we've got a story about a Ouija board and and all the other kind of spooky stuff you would expect. Again, it runs the whole gamut. And the thing we do is we take them pretty much verbatim from the calls, and we just clean them up a little bit, grammatically and so forth. But we don't change major details or anything. And we've done 6 of those. So, and we take a couple of years and pick the best stories out of those years, and we put it together. And that's what we've done with this book. And it's actually, I happen to have a copy right here.
Happen to have a copy.
It is True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire, Volume 6.
I love 6.
That's a cool looking cover, too.
It is.
It is.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's a great 6.
Thank you. Yeah. A little skull in there. But there's also, it should really be true ghost stories and more, because there's some ghost stories, but there's also doppelganger stories and just kind of a microcosm of what you hear on the Campfire.
That's cool.
Jim,
Thank you.
This has been an incredible pleasure for all of us.
Amen.
Believe me, if there was ever someone who was meant to come on the rundown, it's you.
Well, that's why I was so excited. I knew that just about any topic we would pull up, there would be something that you'd have. Oh, yeah, I remember this time, where you heard something, and it's great to have your experience.
That depth of experience was just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight.
We hope you feel you've been treated well, and
yes.
Well,
of course, you're welcome back.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to come back and talk for a couple hours, we're here.
And one of the most important questions is, Jim, how can we get in touch with you?
Well, all you got to do is find me at jimharold.com, JIMHAROLD.com. You can get the links to the book. You can get a contact link. You can get a link to all the podcasts that I do. And there's links to my YouTube channel. Everything is there, and I hope people get to check it out when they get a chance.
They will.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, if nobody has anything else, I think I'll end the program. And Jim, you have our extreme gratitude.
Yes.
Well,
thanks again for joining us.
It has been totally awesome. Totally awesome.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
There you go.
Definitely.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Hello, this is Cedric Dankworth Smythe. Early on in the Paranormal Rundown, we frequently used our dungeon because guests so frequently tried to escape. That doesn't really happen any longer, but let's have some dungeon talk anyway. It's ripping good stuff.
Jim, you are fitting right in with the Paranormal Dork Crew.
we had a guest.
I knew I was a dork, and now it's just been confirmed. It's excellent.
We had a guest named Sylvia Schultz.
Yeah, she was a guest one time for me. I've talked to her.
She's a great guest. We were talking about Rhoda Dairy, and we were just kind of explaining the show, and she goes, "Oh, yeah, Paranormal Dork Talk. I can do that all day long."
And that's how we came up with the Paranormal Dork Crew that Father Mike likes to call it.
I like that.
She was a lot of fun. She was a great guest, and that's a sign of a great guest on the show is somebody who is willing to just jump around between topics and go, well, hey, what about this? Yeah. And it's a slight side road, and that's what.
Hey, Dave. We even talking about birthing rabbits before.
No. We're not talking. No.
Come on, Dave.
You guys are killing me. We had a topic last season.
There you go. Gotta tell him.
Yeah, because you brought it up. We had a topic last season about a woman who stuffed herself with rabbits back in like the 1800s and would pretend to give birth to these rabbits.
Oh, Lord.
So Vic got it out of a newspaper article about a woman giving birth to rabbits. And, of course,
God.
Well, so the thing is, the doctors believed her.
We went deep down that hole. That was the wrong debate.
And this is why you cannot, these guys in that topic are bad news.
We love you, Dave. We love you.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay, so waiting for JJ.
While we're waiting for JJ, I'll tell you my dream story. So I have dreams. Most of the time, I don't know anybody in my dreams. The vast majority of my dreams.
Almost never.
Angry rats.
Well, yeah, but that's a different story. It was a demonic dream. But most of my dreams, I don't know anybody in them. Occasionally, family members will show up, but it's mostly irrelevant stuff. It's not anything important. But I had one dream about a family member, and that was my grandmother. And it was at least 10 years after she passed.
Wow. And
I didn't even realize it bothered me so much. She had emphysema, and she died really painfully. Watching her at the end was absolutely horrific. And one day, like I say, about 10 years later, And think about it. I may have still been smoking at the time, and that may be why she did this. But she came to me in a dream and was there just long enough to show me she was comfortable and that she was good. It was a very short dream, but I woke up with the feeling like she's okay. And I no longer had that memory that had such weight to it of her in the hospital. It was really a healing type dream. And it wasn't anything, like I say, I wasn't thinking about her or anything like that, but it was just a, hey, I'm good. But I'm almost certain it was her.
That was a gift to you, though, in that
absolutely
psychologically you were much more at ease after that.
And I didn't realize how much it bothered me.
Right.
Well, that just gave me a whole new topic for ETC. Can dreams be healing?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So now we come to the end of the first episode of the second season of the Paranormal Rundown. This podcast is a joint production of Father Michael Birdsong, Dave Griffith, JJ Johnson, Josh Birdsong, and myself, Vic Hermanson. Again, we would like to thank Jim Harold for being such a truly excellent guest. Any music that you hear in the show came from either Lobo Loco, Smart Sound, or was in the public domain. Any media clips that appear in the show are used under the protection of the Fair Use Doctrine. We would be very grateful if you would rate and review the Paranormal Rundown where such things are possible, and if you would write to us at feedback@paranormalrundown.com. In 2 weeks, we'll be here with episode 2 of the second season of the Paranormal Rundown. We will see you there.